Two awesome things. First off, Bryce is up here leading songs. How incredibly cool is that? Yeah, give him. The tech guy's leading songs, and he's doing a great job. He texted me and he told me, I'm just a little worried I might lead him a little too country. I was like, this is Wyoming you're talking about. What are you going on? Yeah, he did an awesome job. Also, last week was just an incredible opportunity that we had. You might have noticed some people around that are not regulars, and it was just so cool. We had almost 80 people here with all of the kids and bringing them up here and having all that fun. So I just thought that was cool, and I thought it was a great thing to share. So if you see some of those people that you only see once or twice a year at Walmart, give them a hug and tell them you miss them, and it was great to see them on Easter. So last week, we gave kind of this storybook and this story to all the kids about the garden, the curtain, and the cross. And really what I wanted to do is I just wanted to share the story of Jesus. And it brought us all the way from the garden to the curtain that separated the people, all the way to the cross of Jesus and how he removed that separation from the people. And I know it's a kid's book, but it's definitely worth grabbing just to put in your library. I thought it was pretty great. So we looked at that and we went all the way back to the beginning of the world in the garden, and we came all the way to Jesus at the end and started back in Adam and Eve in the Old Testament and looked at all of the things all the way through the cross. And we don't just celebrate Jesus on certain Sundays at resurrection time. We celebrate that whole story every day. And we talk about the cross, and we often say that's the symbol of Jesus' death, but we celebrate that cross every day. We celebrate the tomb every day and how he rose from it every day, because every day I've got sins that were forgiven. So I thought that was just an amazing thing to share. So looking at that last week, we were all the way back to Adam and Eve and looking at the beginning in the garden. And at the same time, we've been doing this one-year Bible reading. And we've been in the Old Testament. We started at the beginning there as well. We looked at the beginning of the world in Adam and Eve, and then we kept on going through all of these characters in the Old Testament. And it kind of got me thinking, I would really like to talk about some of those characters in the Bible a little bit. We don't talk about those characters very often because we don't read about them very often. And so talk basically about the characters Adam and Eve last week. And I was like, man, we should really just talk about these characters. So if you're familiar, there's a certain group of characters that is talked about in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11, we have this idea of these heroes of the faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, a lot of people call it the Hall of Faith because it's kind of catchy, but basically if you take a look at Hebrews chapter 11, we've got this description of what faith looks like and then some supporting characters, and a good bunch of them, right? So the Hebrew author is talking about all of these characters that were faithful. And so we start at the beginning. We start from Adam and Eve. We go to their son Abel, and we keep on going from there about people who are faithful. And you'll recognize some of these names because we've been reading them in the Old Testament in the one-year Bible. But let me read just a few verses here out of Hebrews chapter 11. Again, talking about faith, the hall of faith. And I don't want to read all of it because I'll give it away. But let's look at kind of the beginning of these characters when the Hebrew writer is talking about the characters who were faithful. He says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him up. Now before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God, and without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning the events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. All right, just a little slice of Hebrews chapter 11. We're talking about faith, and here's a slice of a couple of characters, right? We've got the first three. We've got Abel, the first man we see being righteous before God after the garden. We see Enoch, who was taken by God and didn't see death. And then we get to a character we all know about, right? Noah. We all know about Noah. I know a guy. He's named Noah. He goes, all right. Never mind. I'll try harder next time. The story of Noah, I mean, everybody knows it. But here's the thing. Sometimes we think about this story of Noah, and this is the box we put it in. It's a good kid story, right? It's got animals. It's got rainbows. It's got a giant boat. That sounds really interesting, and we share it with our kids. It's a great Sunday school story. But do you think about it very much as an adult anymore? You should, right? It's not exempt just because it's a good kid's story that we shouldn't talk about it as adults. And so what I want to do is I want to talk about this character, this hero called Noah. He's talked about as a hero who was righteous and had great faith, and you can find his story in the book of Genesis. In fact, if you want to open your Bibles, if we're going to talk about Noah, we're going to be where he's at. So he's very close to the beginning right there. Genesis chapter 6 through 9 is the bulk of Noah's story. Now that being said, if you look at chapter 5, you'll notice it's technically about Noah as well, because it's all of his lineage coming up to Noah. Okay, so this is the little historical background of Noah in chapter 5. In the same way, if you look at chapter 10, it's all of the historical lineage after Noah. So we've got a little end cap on each end of the history getting us to and from Noah. But the bulk of his story, the story of Noah and what's going on, is in Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay? You can find the story there in those few chapters. Again, 5 and 10 give you the genealogy before and after. So when we open up Genesis chapter 6, we kind of start a new scene looking at this guy Noah. And in the first 8 verses of Genesis chapter 6, if you've never read this before, feel free to go home and read it, because I can't read 4 chapters up here today. But feel free, go home and read it. But in those first 8 verses, we see kind of some bullet points about who Noah is and what's going on. We see first, in verse 1 of chapter 6, that man began to multiply the earth. Population, people are spreading, there's people everywhere. And we see people are multiplying, and we see that they're having sons and daughters and populating the earth. It's a good thing, right? We're going from small scale in the garden, getting a little bigger and a little bigger, and by the time we get to Noah, the earth is getting populated. People are getting out there. But there's a problem. There's a problem with all of these people who are populating earth, and it can be summed up in one word: evil. Evil is spreading with them. In fact, the Bible says the wickedness of man. That's in verse 5 of chapter 6. Only 5 verses into Noah's story, and we see what everybody looks like: wicked people. So the earth is being populated by wicked people, and you can see that stated verse 5, verse 10, verse 11. God says that every intention of these people, everything on their hearts, is constantly evil. That's how God is describing these people that he created. Evil constantly. And so sometimes we read this story and we think, man, how bad could it really be? But think about that for a second. Everything on people's minds and hearts is evil? It sounds pretty bad. It doesn't sound like how bad it could be. It sounds like how bad it be. Yeah. The world is an evil place. And this has just continued since the corruption of the garden that we talked about last week. So what God says in the first 8 verses, he already lays out the plan of, there's so many people on the earth, they're all wicked and evil. I am ashamed and I will destroy these people. If you just looked at the first few verses of Noah's story, it's a sad story. The people are wicked. God needs to destroy them. He wished he had never made them, is the image that we get. And Noah is in the middle of this. But he's the exception. But there's one, and his name is Noah. We start reading about him in verse 9. It says, Noah was a righteous man, blameless in the midst of his generation, and he walked with God. Genesis 6:9. So there was one, In all of these people, the world is wicked and evil. Everything on their hearts and their minds is evil. There's one guy named Noah. Again, another thing we never think about, because it's just a kid's story. It's not. You ever feel like you're alone in the world? Like, man, I just wish everybody else at the grocery store was a Christian. Or maybe in traffic. Maybe that's a better. I just wish everybody else in traffic was a Christian. My goodness. How did they not see this giant white bus that I'm driving? That happened to me, right? Man, that's even worse for Noah. Noah's the only person in the whole world. He doesn't have anybody with any righteousness to God around him. We don't hear anything about his wife or kids or friends. Nobody except for one. Noah was righteous. Man, what a tough place to be. I mean, I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and I felt like there was no other Christians around me. I mean, church was like 15 people, 20 on a special occasion. And I can tell you what, none of them were teenagers like me. I felt singled out. Noah was like so much more singled out than me. He was the only righteous person. That's tough. In the whole wide world, he's the only one. But here's the thing. Noah has two options with that. He could say, I'm the only one. This stinks. I give up. I want to die or whatever, you know. But he doesn't do that. He remains righteous to God. And I love the wording that is used here. It says he walked with God. That gives you the idea that he's actively with God, even though he's the only one, right? So he doesn't give up. He finds favor in the eyes of the Lord. And so God shares with him his plan and how he's going to be a part of it. And you can find this in Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 through 22. In fact, let's go ahead and read those verses. There's quite a few of them, so you'll have to do this really difficult thing and find it in the paper. But Genesis chapter 6, let's pick up in verse 13. Let's see what Noah's part of this plan looks like. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So, make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you're to make it. The length of the ark is to be 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door on the side of the ark. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all in which the breath of life is in under heaven. Everything that is on earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife's sons with you, and of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort or every kind into the ark and keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come in with you, and you shall keep them alive. Also, take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this, and he did all that God commanded of him. All that God commanded him. So what we've seen about Noah so far is he, in 10 verses, is the only guy in a wicked generation. The world is populated full of evil people. He's the one that's righteous and walking with God. And so God gives him a job. He tells him his plan. He tells him how he's going to destroy the earth. But here Noah, being the one righteous, has the job of saving the earth. And it's not an easy task. We sometimes think about this and we're like, oh, no big deal. Just build a boat, Noah. Sounds fun. Just just call up the lumber yard, get some of that gopher wood delivered. Should take you a couple of, no. He builds this ark for 100 years. Why? Because it's massive. We're talking 3 football fields long, close to a football field tall and wide. It's huge. And he's going to build it, and then he's going to fill it with animals of every kind or every sort, right? So like, even the gross ones. Like, I would rather just skip the snake sort, you know? Maybe I'd go pick like the nicest snake to put in there. It's like, no king cobras. Let's pick a gardener, yeah. You know? But he's supposed to fill this ark, and he's supposed to fill it with food and build it, and all of this takes him 100 years. Man, being the one righteous man of God doesn't sound like a good gig at this point. I don't know if he got any help from his sons. I mean, there's a lot of work, right? A lot of things to do. But we can see Noah's faith through that. We see that he had faith in God being the one and only righteous person, but we still see he never gave up his faith in God because it took him 100 years to build a boat. I tell you what, sometimes God likes to challenge my faith by taking his time, and he's never taken 100 years. So I have to think about myself, do I have faith like Noah? Because Noah built a boat for 100 years. Do we have faith like Noah? When God gives us a task and it takes a long time, do we give up on him, or do we remain righteous and faithful? So Noah builds this ark, he builds this boat, and the whole time people are mocking him. He never loses the fact that he's the only righteous person. So we have to see that everybody else around him is just laughing at him for 100 years, but yet he still had faith. So I'm starting to see why he's counted in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. Give somebody a test of 100 years of faithfulness, I think you could make it there, because he's building this massive wooden ship forever. But we also see his faith when it comes time for God to do what he said he was going to do. The flood happens. Noah has finished the ark after 100 years, and God is fulfilling his promise. And so Noah gets in there, he's got all the animals in there, they got all the food of different kinds, just like God said, and God shuts that door behind them and seals them in. Mission accomplished for Noah, right? No. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights. You remember this winter when it was like snowy a lot? We'd get pretty upset. It was like, okay, it's been snowing for 2 days straight. That's plenty too long. Like, we're used to half a day, okay? 40 days and 40 nights? Noah still had faith at the end of all that. We see that by him releasing the birds and seeking God and all of that at the end of the 40 days. He still had faith. He didn't give up while being locked in a wooden boat with smelly animals. He didn't give up on God. And so finally, after not only 40 days, but another 100, they finally get back to land. They finally get back to land, and there's a lot of details about that. Again, I can't tell you everything today because we don't have all the time. But over 150 days total, and we finally see Noah walking out the door that he walked in, being the one and his family who survived the flood with all the animals and all the food. And after this, he praises God. We see him praising God when he gets out on the land in Genesis chapter 9. He praises the Lord, he builds an offer, he makes a sacrifice. Even though he's just been through the worst 150 or 101 years of his life, followed by 150 days in a boat, he gets out and he says, God is holy, God is righteous, here is a sacrifice. And we see that all happening when he gets to the land. Incredible stuff. He praises God and God reciprocates it. God makes a covenant and a promise to Noah. And we talk about it pretty awesome, but the bow in the skies, we call it a rainbow these days because what had just happened for Noah forever, rain, right? And now we know the science behind it, and that even makes it cooler because we know rainbows are just from light shining through water in the sky. But God gave that to Noah. Apparently, that'd never been a thing before, so I could see why Noah would be like, whoa. He gave that to Noah saying, hey, I will never do this again. I will never destroy the entire earth with a flood. And he shows him that by water particles and light in the sky. It's almost as if the light is shining through the water that had just destroyed the earth. It's cool. So we see Noah praise God. We see God praise Noah. Things are great. This is the beginning of Genesis chapter 9. They're going to start filling the earth back up, and that's what history looks like. And things are great. So Noah, he brought all of this food. He's got everything he needs to start farming. The first thing you got to farm is you got to make some vineyards, because you got to drink some wine, right? That's what Noah's thinking. But the funny thing about wine and vineyards is they can sometimes get you into trouble. And for some reason, we never tell the kids this part of the story at the end of Genesis chapter 9. Because it's a real part of Noah's story. I'm not going to skip it, right? He plants the vineyard, he makes the wine, they're established on earth again, and here's what happens. He gets drunk, and he passes out without clothing in the tent. One of the problems about having too much wine. He stumbles, right? We've been talking this entire time about how faithful and how righteous Noah is, and then at the end of his story, we just see him mess up. And we're like, okay, it's no big deal. He's still a righteous man. You're right, he is still a righteous man, but it is a big deal. Because here's the problem. One of his sons walks in and sees him. This is a really big deal culturally to them. This is like, I can never see this. And so he tries to do what is respectful. He goes and gets his other brother and he says, let's walk in backwards and drop a blanket on Dad, because he went crazy on the wine. But Noah finds out about it in the end of Genesis chapter 9. I invite you to read the story. And it doesn't matter that Ham tried to do the right thing. Shem? He didn't try to do the right thing? Yeah, he went and told his brothers. There's two different trains of thoughts on this, but either way, he told his brothers, they covered him up. Let's just get us there, right? And he's still cursed. This is a generational curse, too. It's not just like Tuesday you're cursed, Wednesday you're cursed. No. For the rest of time, what happens? He's going to be at war with all the other nations, his brothers. And their servants and their generations and generations and generations forever. And we can see it in history. So Noah's mess up created a mess up for the rest of history. Things weren't going to be peaceful. Things weren't going to be calm. But rather, Noah had a mess up even though he was a righteous man. How do we fit that into this story of a very faithful person we've just been talking about? Well, the answer is, we just don't tell the kids the part of that story. But that's not the right answer, is it? So I want you to take one thing home, and I think it's the most important thing. Noah was a righteous and faithful man. I want to have a faith like Noah. We should have a faith like Noah. That's most important, point number one, right? Point number two, but he still messed up. He was still a human. And I want to have a faith like Noah, but I also have to understand, point number two, that I might mess up like Noah because I'm a human. But Noah was still a faithful man. Noah was still righteous. Even though he caused problems for the rest of time, he still went back to God and served him. So point number one is have a faith like Noah. And point number two is have a faith like Noah, even though you'll probably also mess up like Noah. See, even when he failed, he didn't give up. Even when he caused division for all nations to come, he didn't give up on God. He still remained with God. So that's the second piece you might want to take home. Maybe not. Maybe you just want the first piece. It's more powerful anyway. Have a faith like Noah, but understand he was a human and still had a faith. If there's anything we do well as humans, is we can lose track of God and we can stumble and we can fall. But the point I want us to take home on the second piece is get back up again and continue to serve God, even if you cursed your children and generations to come. So have a faith like Noah. Noah was an incredible story, and sometimes we just make it a small little story. This is the man that continued to be righteous to God in a world where nobody was righteous to God. This is a man who took over 100 years to build a boat, a cruise ship out of wood. Yeah, it's crazy. He was faithful. He stayed faithful in the storm for 40 days and 40 nights. Have a faith like Noah. But even when you mess up, maybe like Noah, turn back to God and have a faith then as well. Don't give up on God anywhere along the story. And then maybe one of these days we'll get to heaven, and maybe we'll get to be counted as a hero of faith alongside Noah. I'm going to hand it over to Bryce to do our last song here in just a second. If you want to stand, sure, please do.